If you were to trace the rise of China as a superpower, you might expect to find a single decisive moment, a bold strategy executed with precision, or a carefully orchestrated long-term plan that reshaped the global order. But the truth is far more uncomfortable, because China's rise was not just built in Beijing. It was quietly enabled by decisions made thousands of miles away in Washington, London, and across the Western world. For decades, policymakers believed that integrating China into the global economy would reshape its political system, turning it into a cooperative stakeholder rather than a strategic rival. Instead, those same decisions ended up accelerating China's transformation into a dominant industrial, technological, and geopolitical force that now challenges the very system that enabled its rise. This is the story of how one of the most consequential strategic miscalculations in modern history unfolded, not through conflict or crisis, but through cooperation, optimism, and economic logic. And how that mistake is still shaping the global balance of power today, in ways that are becoming harder to ignore with each passing year. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to the late 20th century, when China was still largely isolated, economically underdeveloped, and far from being considered a global power. At that time, Western economies were dominant, controlling global trade flows, technological innovation, and financial systems, while China remained on the periphery of the global order. When China began opening its economy under reform policies, it presented a unique opportunity for Western businesses seeking lower production costs and access to a vast new market. That opportunity triggered a wave of engagement, as companies moved manufacturing to China, attracted by cheaper labor, fewer regulations, and the promise of higher profit margins. This shift was not seen as risky, because China was viewed as a developing economy that would gradually align with global norms as it integrated into international systems. The assumption was simple: economic integration would lead to political convergence, and China would evolve into a system more compatible with Western expectations. That assumption shaped one of the most significant decisions of the era, supporting China's entry into global institutions like the World Trade Organization. By allowing China into the global trading system, Western nations effectively granted it access to international markets, investment flows, and a framework that accelerated its economic growth. What followed was an unprecedented expansion of manufacturing capacity, as China became the world's factory, producing goods at a scale and cost no other country could match. This transformation was driven by a powerful combination of state support, foreign investment, and an abundant labor force willing to work at competitive wages. As production shifted to China, Western economies began to experience deindustrialization, with factories closing and jobs moving overseas in search of efficiency and lower costs. At the same time, consumers benefited from cheaper goods, reinforcing the belief that globalization was working, even as structural changes began to reshape domestic economies. The deeper consequence, however, was less visible at first, because China was not just producing goods, it was absorbing knowledge, technology, and industrial expertise. Every factory built, every joint venture signed, and every supply chain integrated contributed to the development of China's own capabilities across multiple sectors. Over time, this created a feedback loop, as increased production led to improved efficiency, which attracted more investment, further accelerating industrial growth. This cycle transformed China from a low-cost manufacturer into a highly sophisticated industrial economy capable of producing advanced goods at competitive prices. While Western companies focused on short-term profitability, China focused on long-term capacity building, using the same system to strengthen its domestic industries. This difference in approach created a strategic imbalance, where one side optimized for efficiency while the other optimized for power and resilience. As China's industrial base expanded, it began moving up the value chain, transitioning from basic manufacturing to higher value industries such as electronics, machinery, and technology. This shift was not accidental. It was supported by targeted policies, investments in education, and a coordinated effort to reduce dependence on foreign technology. The result was a gradual but decisive change, where China was no longer just assembling products, but designing, engineering, and innovating at a global level. Meanwhile, Western economies became increasingly dependent on Chinese production, creating supply chains that stretched across continents and relied on centralized manufacturing hubs. This dependence introduced new vulnerabilities, because disruptions in one part of the system could have cascading effects across entire industries. The true scale of this vulnerability became clearer during global disruptions, when supply chains were strained and the concentration of production created bottlenecks. At that point, it became evident that efficiency had come at the cost of resilience. and the system that once delivered low prices now carried significant strategic risks. China, on the other hand, benefited from this structure, as it gained leverage not only through production, but through its position within critical supply chains. This leverage extended beyond economics, influencing geopolitical dynamics and shifting the balance of power in ways that were not fully anticipated. As China accumulated wealth and industrial strength, it also invested in infrastructure, both domestically and internationally, expanding its influence across regions. Projects aimed at connecting markets and securing resources further strengthened China's position, linking its economic growth to global networks. At the same time, technological competition began to intensify, as China invested heavily in research, development, and emerging industries. This marked a turning point, because the competition was no longer about manufacturing capacity alone, but about leadership in critical technologies. Western countries, which had once been dominant in these areas, began to recognize that the gap was narrowing faster than expected. Efforts to respond were complicated by the very interdependence that had been created, making it difficult to disentangle economies without significant cost. What was once seen as a mutually beneficial relationship started to look increasingly asymmetric, with one side gaining strategic advantages over time. The policies that had enabled integration now appeared to have unintended consequences, strengthening a competitor that operated under a different set of priorities. This shift forced a reassessment, as governments began to question earlier assumptions about globalization and the risks of overdependence. However, reversing these dynamics proved far more difficult than creating them, because supply chains, investments, and market relationships had become deeply embedded. Attempts to diversify production and reduce reliance on China required time, capital, and structural changes that could not happen overnight. Meanwhile, China continued to expand its capabilities, leveraging its existing advantages to reinforce its position across industries. This created a complex situation, where efforts to limit China's rise were constrained by the very system that had enabled it. The strategic mistake was not a single decision, but a series of interconnected choices that collectively reshaped the global economy. Each decision made sense in isolation, driven by economic logic and short-term benefits, but together they produced long-term consequences that were difficult to foresee. The pursuit of efficiency led to concentration, the pursuit of growth led to dependency, and the pursuit of integration led to strategic exposure. China's rise, therefore, was not just a story of internal development, but a reflection of how global systems can produce unexpected outcomes. As the balance of power continues to shift, the implications of these decisions are becoming more pronounced across economic, political, and technological domains. Countries are now reevaluating their positions, seeking to balance the benefits of globalization with the need for resilience and security. This has led to new strategies, including reshoring, diversification, and efforts to build alternative supply networks. However, these adjustments come with trade-offs, often increasing costs and reducing the efficiencies that once drove growth. The world is now entering a phase where the consequences of past decisions are shaping present realities, influencing how nations interact and compete. China remains deeply integrated into the global system, but it is also increasingly positioned as a strategic competitor rather than just an economic partner. This dual role creates tension, as cooperation and competition coexist within the same framework, complicating decision-making. For policymakers, the challenge is no longer about whether integration was beneficial, but how to manage its long-term consequences. The system that once seemed stable is now evolving, as new dynamics emerge and old assumptions are tested. Understanding how this situation developed is critical, because it reveals how interconnected decisions can reshape the global order. It also highlights the importance of thinking beyond immediate gains, considering how policies can create lasting structural effects. The story of China's rise is not just about one country's growth, but about how the global system itself can produce unintended outcomes. And as the world continues to adapt, the lessons from this period will likely influence decisions for decades to come. If you want more deep, clear breakdowns of how global power is shifting and what it means for the future, subscribe to Global Power Brief and stay ahead of the bigger picture.